Nookie in Kabul. Yes, it's Nookie in Kabul. Nookie in Kabul? Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to the Keiser Report. So now we understand why the American generals said it was impossible to pull out of Afghanistan and that a surge was in fact needed. Yes, in Xanadu did the U.S. generals a stately pleasure dome decree for all their biographers and unpaid social liaison officers. Yes, Afghanistan is just so frickin' romantic this time of year. But if the U.S. generals are protecting the war in Afghanistan for a safe nookie on the side haven, well, why is David Cameron protecting the city of London, calling for a doubling down of fraud? Who is stooping who? David Cameron? Stacey?
Yes, Max. David Cameron used an annual speech at the Guildhall which is normally reserved for foreign policy. And he instead talked about bankers and the City of London as an export, as a sort of foreign policy. It is the currency war. It is the financial war. And Max, I think he was addressing you. David Cameron attacks trashers of Britain's banks. Prime Minister uses annual Mansion House speech to highlight strength and potential of banking sector. David Cameron gave a warning on Monday night that critics of the nation's banks end up trashing Britain as he mounted a strong defense of the financial services industry.
Oh, yeah, I've been following closely David, the Stippmeister Cameron's endorsement of the City of London, doubling down on fraud. I was reading in the Telegraph here, banks give us edge in global race, says the Prime Minister. The global race in laxity, the global race in bank fraud. And this is what Frankfurt and Germany understand. This is why they're pushing the UK to get out of this banking union on the continent, because they realize that the rise of Frankfurt and the fall of the City of London is imminent. And David Cameron is scoring an own goal against himself. He is a frickin' idiot.
So next he goes on to make an argument that in terms of foreign policy could be an argument made by Somalia. He says Cameron acknowledged that terrible mistakes had been made in the city, but he pointed out that financial services contributed an eighth of all government revenue during the recession.
That's right. In Somalia, piracy contributes half of the GDP of that country. That's what David Cameron is advocating, that the UK engage in more piracy, maybe get it up to 50%. After all, that's what's driving the real estate values in the UK, is piracy in the City of London. That's who funds David Cameron's re-election campaigns, the piracy in the City of London. That's how David Cameron is welcomed. That's why he's welcomed around the world, is by fellow pirates in other countries. He should hoist the Jolly Roger up there at the House of Commons instead of the Union Jack.
So, and you know, that's the argument that the UN made as well regarding, say, Italy or Europe during the financial crisis. And here David Cameron is saying, well, during the recession, an eighth of all government revenue came from the City of London. Well, during the financial collapse, it was only the mafia money that kept the banks afloat.
Oh, well, this is a little reported story. The bank collapse of 2008 relied 100% on the drug laundering through HSBC and other banks from Mexican drug cartels. Look it up. 100% of the cash. That's what Cameron would. He's not going to stop until 90% of the citizens in the UK are snorting their way to GDP growth and money laundering.
As we see, David Cameron has gone all in on the City of London. He's, in fact, recommending a surge overseas of what they export. And to prove that he's a floozy for the city, David Cameron's wardrobe malfunction is pretty embarrassing photos. So as you see here, his shirt is unbuttoned all the way down to his navel. And, you know, the Huffington Post just points out, you know, his rolls of fat there. But William Bond's i7 has a special viewfinder where he could see actually close up. And as you see in this image, I think that looks like Lloyd Blankfein coming out.
Lloyd Blankfein is nursing on the of the Bank of England again. No, this is amazing because we see quite clearly that David Cameron is willing to go that extra mile to secure bank fraud from the big multinational institutional money launderers and market manipulators by showing a little That's what's great about David Cameron. He'll flash his to try to get banks on Wall Street in the City of London to come and, like Lloyd Blankfein, suck on the of largesse of the Bank of England. Next, he'll be wearing a skirt. Next, he'll be wearing a wig and lipstick. He's a tart. He's dressed up like a tart in Pigalle in France or, Old Compton Street. I expect to see David Cameron sashaying around some of those clubs looking for rent boys to get secured money so that he can grow the GDP based on prostitution, money laundering, whoring. David, you're a freaking tart!
So David Cameron said, the city made just some terrible mistakes and it's time to stop trashing them because otherwise you're going to trash Britain. So, we had over this past year a massive, mega, global fraud scandal with the LIBOR rigging, which rigged global interest rates. Now, JP Morgan, of course, was at the head of that, but I saw you flinch when I said that.
No, when you say David Cameron, he making massive mistakes, he means they didn't wear a condom. Okay? He thinks that the GDP of the UK is based on some kind of nocturnal emission from backroom dealing amongst the coterie of insider traders around the global banking system. The man is a shameless tart.
So LIBOR rates are set, or were set, in a room of men secretly. It wasn't set electronically. It wasn't the market itself setting it.
It's a circle rate.
Yeah.
It's a circle rate. It's a circle rate. They're engaged in circle rating.
Okay, so David Cameron, however, is saying, let's move on from this circle rating. And yet, look what happens. FSA examines whistleblowers' claims of LIBOR-like manipulation in gas prices. Max, this is from September 28th of 2012. Since the LIBOR rate rigging has come to light, they're engaged in the same exact practices. It's spread. It's systemic, this corruption. The city watchdog, the Financial Services Authority, is investigating claims by a whistleblower that Britain's £300 billion wholesale gas market has been regularly manipulated by some of the big power companies, exploiting weaknesses that echo the recent LIBOR scandal. So Ofgem is also, which regulates the energy industry, is also looking into this. And sure enough, on September 28th, 2012, there were a series of bids at 4:30, which was the closing at which the index is set, that they were underbidding the market. They all submitted bids that were lower than the prevailing price.
Let me explain how this all goes down in the mosh pit of fraud that is enabled by the Bank of England and energy traders, City of Wall Street, traders around the world. Central banks, including the central bank in the UK, the Bank of England, has been engaged in massive market fraud in the guise of quantitative easing. They have been interfering with markets by buying bonds to force interest rates lower. This has caused inflation in things like energy and food in a stagnating economy, result being stagflation. But here comes September 28th. Into this environment of rising commodity prices due to the manipulations and fraud of the Bank of England, a few traders step in. They manipulate prices lower, which is easy to do because the prices of these commodities are cooked to begin with thanks to the machinations of a very corrupt Mervyn King in the Bank of England. They manipulate those prices down for a day, cash in on one day's price drop in a flash crash engineered by terrorists in the City of London, led by their chief terrorist, David Cameron. And then the next day, the primary trend resumes of higher prices brought about by Bank of England and the Federal Reserve Bank and ECB flooding the market with cash in a race to the bottom. It's fraud meets fraud in a paradigm of fraud covered in a shiny glaze of circle raiders and their unholy fraud.
So the whistleblower, Seth Friedman, he was one of the price reporters, and he talks about the fact that basically the price reporters have to rely on the traders to tell them what the prices are. And the traders were the ones that were lying. And he said price reporters struggle to set accurate benchmarks because they lack detailed information about trading in the opaque, so-called over-the-counter market and are dependent on what traders tell them about market activity.
We've talked about this, price propaganda. The traders will manipulate prices to a level to get the index to trigger a response from regulators and other agents and players in the market to cash in on the fraud. So this is a question of using algorithmic trading, for example. I've said before, like Lloyd Blankfein, he mentioned him earlier, he's really one of the most egregious exploiters of this type of manipulation, where Goldman Sachs picks a price first and then fills in the trades to get to the price. That's a complete bastardization of the price discovery idea, where trades take place first and they end up at a mutually beneficial price. No, that doesn't happen anymore. Now you've got like people like Lloyd Blankfein or David Cameron's buddy in the City of London who pick a price first that they know that they can cash in and make enormous amounts of illegal money, and then they fill in the trades to make it look like that price was arrived at organically. It's complete and utter fraud. They're milking and bilking and stealing money from the system, and the result is austerity. The people in Europe who are rioting all over Europe have a right to do so because they're being circle rated. They're victims of price propaganda. They're being asked to suffer austerity to pad the re-election campaign of David frickin' Amatart Cameron.
So ISIS Heron, the group that is the price reporting agency at which this whistleblower came from, they said that if anyone was to benefit from this, it would have been derivatives traders. So this is that world we live in now where you have the real market and then this huge, opaque, over-the-counter derivatives market that Jamie Dimon is at the lead of making sure there's no regulation, no oversight, no real market there, and it's just a bunch of guys like himself fixing these prices and telling people what they are, whether they're credit default swaps, insurance for Greece, or whether it's an interest rate swap for a municipality in America. And you see it spread throughout the system now. Every market, gasoline market, the gas market, the oil market, everywhere is rigged. And, you know, you might get the support of the population because just like Al Capone went to the local community where he was ripping them off, gave them a $2 chicken or a $2 turkey, while his guys, his thugs, were going around the back of the same house stealing $50 worth of goods. But they were thankful for the $2 of free turkey.
They're not manipulating prices down. They're manipulating prices up on the central bank level. And then a few local thugs are using market manipulation to grab a quick smash and grab by dropping prices for a day or a half a day. But the trend is higher due to the massive global fraud on the central bank level. Mervyn King, Ben Bernanke, whoever runs the ECB. The bank, those are the guys that are driving the truck off the fiscal, monetary, global, economic cliff. All right, Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being once again with me here today on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half. I'll be speaking with Francine McKenna, scourge of the corrupt accounting business. We'll be talking more about J.P. Morgan, financial terrorist. Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to New York and speak with Francine McKenna of ReTheAuditors.com. Francine, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
All right, Francine McKenna, it's been over a year since the MF Global collapse. Did they ever find the $1.8 billion that vaporized? Where did the money returned to clients come from? What's the latest?
Still missing, Max. Still missing. $1.6 billion. Still missing. And they're starting to return some money from clients, but that money's coming from other sources. Some of the money returned from other people that they're making claims against, taking from some of the creditors, etc. But they still haven't told us where the money went specifically, and they certainly haven't gotten most of it back.
All right, now, Elizabeth Warren was going to serve under Barack Obama as a consumer watchdog in the financial industry, but she was prevented from assuming that role because she was actually talking about accountability, so they wouldn't allow her to assume that position. But now she's a senator in Massachusetts. Is she going to do anything to stop this?
Well, you know, I bet they wish that they didn't stop her from being Consumer Financial Protection Bureau chief, and now they've got to deal with her in the Senate. There's a lot of people that assume she's going to be on the banking committee, maybe even have some kind of leadership role. I think that's a little bit wishful thinking. But if Elizabeth Warren stays true to all of her promises and all of her rhetoric before, I think she'll be talking about banking no matter where she is, even if she's on some ag committee or put on some obscure other committee.
Has there been any communication with Elizabeth Warren's office and your group, who has been a tireless whistleblower and watchdog for accounting fraud. Has there been any communication? Is there any consensus growing, any kind of coalition growing between Washington and folks like yourself who have been supplying some fantastic insight into the frauds? Is there anything going on along those lines?
Well, I am fortunate, because of my American Banker columns in particular, to have developed some very good contacts in Washington, in particular in the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives. And they're in constant contact asking me what I'm going to write about next, in particular the foreclosure reviews, foreclosure fraud, mortgage fraud, the reviews of the banks on that front. I think that as soon as the new term starts, we're going to be talking about a lot. We're going to have more hearings. There's a report coming out on MF Global from the Senate to talk about what they think happened in MF Global. They said, though, at a Futures Industry Association Expo in Chicago week before last, though, that there were people that wouldn't talk to them, if you can believe it. A Senate committee, a Senate Investigations Committee, and there are people that wouldn't talk to them. They didn't get the cooperation they needed. So I think that there's actually still a lot going on the MF Global side. Certainly the banks are still under scrutiny. When I wrote about JP Morgan at the beginning of January of last year and said Jamie Dimon will lose his job by the end of the year, I never even anticipated the whale trades, let alone everything else that they're being investigated for now, including anti-money laundering, LIBOR, you name it. Jamie Dimon has to defend himself against so many other regulatory issues that bankers in Europe have lost their jobs over. Why is he still in his job?
Yeah, I want to ask you about this cross-Atlantic regulatory arbitrage, if you will. You've got Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan in New York, along with Goldman Sachs, but principally JP Morgan involved in the MF Global scandal, involved in numerous accounting fraud scandals, and involved in market manipulation scandals. Contrast that, of course, with Barclays and HSBC here in the UK, where the government here in Britain seems to be getting a little bit more proactive in at least paying some lip service to trying and rein in these terrorist bankers. Here's my question, Francine McKenna. Given this regulatory arbitrage, given the fact that Wall Street outsources its fraud to the UK for the most part, and given the fact that the UK is now downsizing, is there a bit of, let's say, purposeful attempt by Wall Street to dump a lot of this stuff in the City of London as a way to competitively drive the City of London down? You see what I'm saying? I mean, is there any competitive cross currents along those lines?
I see what you mean. I'm not sure. I think that, unfortunately, the bankers here in the U.S. bet on Romney, and that bet was really, really, really wrong. Now they're going to have to deal with an Obama that's re-energized and hopefully has a little bit of impetus to do some of the things that we've been talking about. But that's the thing. If the bankers leave London, if they're whining or complaining about London, where are they going to go? And if the U.S. wants to send transactions to London, that's probably the wrong place right now because, as you said, there's more scrutiny. There's even scrutiny in Switzerland. You have UBS, the rogue trader, on trial. You have that senior banker, CEO, lost his job, too, over that scandal. I mean, really, I think there's going to have to be a come to Jesus. The bankers are going to have to realize something's changed, and hopefully the Obama administration will reinforce that. Some of them are already talking about shedding certain businesses. Where the business is going to go, who knows? But, I think they better stop circling the drain and thinking we're just going to move it somewhere else and keep doing what we're doing. I think that the number is up, and they're going to have to fess up, and hopefully it'll be reinforced by enforcement here in the United States. I'd like to see a lot stronger enforcement rather than the passes that the banks have been getting. JP Morgan is actually really under an enormous amount of scrutiny right now. There was a new report that there's $140 billion that they reported in their last quarterly report of mortgage exposure that they could have to have mortgage putback risks. I'm sure Terry Buell will talk about that in another session. But that's the thing. They've been putting it off, extending and pretending that they don't have the problems that the other banks have, because Jamie Dimon has had sort of a results reprieve. He's had good results, and he's gotten away with sort of having all these other illegal and fraudulent things happen at JP Morgan, having them go to London or wherever else they are so that people don't see them right away, having the results juiced by things like delaying reserves and delaying recognition of some of this litigation that's against them. He's not going to be able to do that anymore. There's nowhere else to go. As you said, scrutiny is everywhere because people are fed up.
Right. Jamie Dimon, the results for J.P. Morgan recently, they showed some surprise revenue and income and profits due primarily to accounting tricks, to changes in loss reserve requirements. And but
exactly
with every quarter, though, the word is that, well, this is it. They've run out of rabbits to pull out of the hat. This next quarter, they're going to have to actually show the fragility of their balance sheet, and they're going to see a big comeuppance coming for J.P. Morgan and Jamie Dimon. Let me ask you about their operations in London. According to the Volcker rule separating proprietary trading from other forms of trading, the London whale loss exposed that J.P. Morgan was, in fact, breaking that law. Is there going to be any attempt to comply with the law going forward, or will Jamie Dimon and J.P. Morgan continue to break the law on the proprietary desk side of things?
Well, they put those proprietary trades, what was left of that position, in the investment bank where supposedly it belonged. But that's not to say that they're not putting on new positions in their investment office, whether in London or whether in New York. The problem is that there's not enough scrutiny by the regulators or by the auditors of what they're actually doing there. Why? They weren't supposed to be doing that kind of activity in the investment office, and so nobody was looking. Well, now they know, so what's the excuse? When you have J.P. Morgan have to have a financial restatement because they had to admit they were even manipulating the trade values after they admitted the loss, what more do you need in order to know that you need to scrutinize much, much, much more carefully what they're doing everywhere, in every location and in every department of that bank? Because you're right, they're going to try to keep squeezing profits out, keep having a cushion somewhere, keep having a cookie jar they can pull from. I think one of these private litigation lawsuits against the mortgage, in the mortgage issues, whether it's the Bear Stearns thing of the New York Attorney General, whether it's one of these private lawsuits, whether it's FHFA that's suing on behalf of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, one of them is going to hit them hard, and it's going to take whatever they've got left, or at least most of what they've got left, and they're going to have to dig deep. And unfortunately, the banking business, other than making new mortgages, is not very good. Interest rates are low, and they're not doing a lot of business a lot of other places.
By the way, you know, we're celebrating 2 years of our Crash J.P. Morgan Buy Silver campaign, Francine, so I hope you've been loading up in silver to help us decapitalize the financial terrorist J.P. Morgan. Now, in your latest Forbes piece, Francine, entitled, Is the SEC's Ponzi Crusade Enabling Companies to Cook the Books Enron Style? Tell us about this.
Well, in the latest Forbes issue, the most recent Forbes issue of the magazine, I wrote about the fact that the SEC dismantled their accounting fraud task force after the reforms that they took on when the Madoff scandal hit. They were criticized significantly for missing the Madoff scandal, and they had to beef up their reviews of investment advisors and other kinds of Ponzi schemes and the insider trading. What they've done is they've reorganized along those lines, and accounting fraud is just sort of spread around amongst the people that had that expertise, but not with a focal point, and certainly not with reporting or accountability in terms of whether or not they actually bring any cases. So the cases they've been bringing are fairly small. They're instead racking up the numbers in Ponzi schemes, insider trading, Foreign Corrupt Practice Act. They built a template, and they can just replicate those charges over and over and over again. Because of that, they're not bringing the harder, sort of icky, sticky accounting fraud cases. Those take a little bit more work. Those are politically unpopular because the SEC professionals want to go to work, either for the corporations as inside counsel or for the law firms that defend corporations. Nobody likes a Ponzi schemer. Nobody likes the inside traders that are stupid enough to get caught. So no problem enforcing that those laws. They're, I think, not enforcing accounting fraud cases where we've seen clear-cut indications that fraud took place, and they're not bringing those companies or the individuals to justice, in particular related to the financial crisis.
You write that in 2011, the SEC brought a record 735 enforcement actions, but only 89 of those actions targeted fraudulent or misleading accounting, the fewest by far in a decade. So, Francine McKenna, plenty more fraud yet in the pipeline, so we'll have to have you back on again soon. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks so much, Max. Great to see you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Francine McKenna, and you can find her over at readtheauditors.com. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, Max Keiser saying follow me on Twitter. Bye, y'all.